Life is relationships. Why? Because life is about how we feel, the emotions we feel. And after the basic necessities of health, relationships are the single most important thing for feeling good. And my premise is that in order to have a good life, you need to feel good. And by good, I mean positive emotional states. If you don't agree with this premise, then the rest of what I'm about to say will not apply to you. Humans are extremely social animals. This can all be traced back to our evolution through hundreds of thousands of years. People who stayed alone died more often from diseases and starvation, etc. People who stayed together survived and had children. And those children are who we are descendants of. It's so deeply ingrained in our DNA to stay within groups and to not be alone that not only are we happier when we are with others, but we actually die sooner by being alone. The longest standing study on human health and happiness from Harvard can confirm this. The quality of a person's day is largely dependent on how many positive social interactions they had. And we know that feeling lonely has the same impact as smoking 20 cigarettes per day. So, what I'm telling you is that the quality of your life is largely based on your relationships. But here's the thing, everything about being in a relationship isn't sunshine and rainbows. As soon as you have anything more than one person, then you immediately get two or more needs, wills, and wants. These two or more needs, wills, and wants don't always align completely. In fact, I'd argue that the rule is that we need and want different things, and the exception is that we want the same thing. It can happen, say you and your siblings are planning when you should get together the next time, and everybody wants to meet on Sunday. No issue there. But even there, it's highly unlikely that you want to meet the exact same time on Sunday and what you will cook, etc. More often, reality looks something like this. Your brothers can only meet on Friday and Sunday, but they prefer Friday, and your sisters can only meet Sunday and Monday, but they prefer Monday. Now what? This is where compromises come in. The general definition of a compromise is to make a deal between different parties where each party gives up part of their demand. Your brothers and your sisters make a deal. Your sisters give up part of their demand by agreeing to meet on Sunday, despite preferring to meet on Monday. And your brothers give up part of their demand by agreeing to meet on Sunday, despite preferring to meet on Friday. A compromise is a give and take, or receive. A compromise is suboptimal per definition because you get less than what you originally wanted by having to give up part of your demand. You prefer to just take, but in the compromise, you had to give in order to take or receive. But here's the catch. A compromise is almost always the least bad option available. It sounds extremely contradictory. Quote, a compromise is not the best by definition, but at the same time, it's the best solution available, end quote. That's because the compromise is not the best in theory, but in reality, it's the best available alternative. It's better meeting on Sunday than not meeting at all, most would feel. As a rule, we can't get what we want without compromising with others. Since humans are extremely social animals, we can very rarely survive on our own. Thus, if you never compromised in your life, you would most likely be excluded and be living alone in the wild in the best case, or dead in the worst case. An example of a necessary compromise is if you and your roommate are arguing about the temperature in your shared flat. He wants it at 20 degrees Celsius and you want it at 30 degrees. Some sort of compromise is then the only available solution. Whether that's splitting the difference and meeting in the middle at 25 degrees, or buying him a separate air conditioner for his room, part of your original demand you'll have to give up. And you'll have to give something in order to receive. As the famous Rolling Stones song goes, you can't always get what you want. Notice that a compromise is not always strictly meeting in the middle, or splitting the difference by meeting at 25 degrees Celsius here. There are many different types of compromises, as the FBI negotiator Chris Voss would agree. By you agreeing to 20 degrees, which is less than what you wanted, he, your roommate, might be able to help you by doing the dishes. And sometimes by talking disagreement out with the other party, it's possible to learn something new that you didn't know and that can solve the situation without having to compromise in the first place. A third example applies to the corporate environment, wherein workers with a union go on strike to demand higher salaries, while the company wants to keep salaries low. A solution has to be made because the workers need their salaries and the company needs to keep the production running. If no compromise is made, then a stalemate or deadlock occurs where nothing is achieved, and this is to no one's advantage. Also, I should say that there are a few factors that tend to affect what type of a compromise that will take place with the person that you're disagreeing with. I'll bring up four big circumstances here. Keep in mind that they're not mutually exclusive and that they can sometimes mix and converge. 1. How much we value the relationship. 2. Supply and demand. 3. Power imbalance. 4. Emotional investment. For many different reasons, one person might value the relationship more than the other. How much two parties value a relationship is often not equal, as sad as that is. Typically, people with a stronger need for maintaining a relationship are more inclined to accept compromises that are less favorable to themselves. This can be seen in negotiation and conflict resolution scenarios, where the less invested party feels less pressure to yield, because the less invested party has less of a cost of walking away. One of the parties is usually willing to sacrifice more to find solutions. Interestingly, this is actually the entire basis for the personality trait agreeableness in the Big Five personality model. Agreeableness is a trait that varies widely all over the population depending on our personality. Interestingly, women score higher in agreeableness than men. And agreeableness is a personality trait referring to individuals that are perceived as kind, sympathetic, cooperative, warm, honest, and considerate. People high in agreeableness, I should say, will prioritize peace and a good relationship over a potential personal gain. And this also makes them worse at negotiating salaries. In this context, with compromises, it tells us that this personality trait can be affected by how our life situation is at that moment. Meaning, we have a biological baseline of how high we score on the personality trait agreeableness, but then that has to be combined with how our life situation looks at that moment in order to predict how agreeable and how likely to compromise you'll be. It doesn't matter what your personality type is. If you have a lot of cookies, then you're more likely to be agreeable and share. Say we have a guy named Albert. You are Albert's only friend, while you have many. The sad reality is that he most likely will value your relationship more than you value it. You have more options, so you'll be less agreeable than you might, and Albert will be more agreeable than he would in another situation. In other words, he is more inclined to accept compromises that are less favorable to him to preserve your relationship. As a simple matter of supply and demand. Which takes me to the next circumstance that can impact a potential compromise: supply and demand. Others are demanding you more than they're demanding Albert. And this is where the whole "you are out of her league" comes from. She's more in demand than you. Supply and demand is one out of many things that can cause a power imbalance. If the company can hire other workers easily, then the company doesn't have much incentive to an even and equal compromise, which is give up part of their demands. And it would be very difficult to change their minds as an employee. An even and equal compromise usually only happens if there's a roughly equal power balance between the two or more parties involved. Pets and young children usually don't have much say since their parents are completely in control of their well-being. A recruit in the military won't have much say over the drill sergeant because of the power imbalance, or a policeman and a citizen, or someone with guns and potential for violence versus someone unarmed. There isn't much room for compromise when someone is robbing you at gunpoint. Note, however, that despite the fact that an even and equal compromise does not take place, an uneven and unequal compromise can still take place for a variety of reasons. Love and emotional investment. Sometimes, as pro social beings, we want to compromise despite not having to do so because we love the other person and we want to see them prosperous. If you're madly in love or infatuated with someone, it's common occurrence that you compromise in ways you normally wouldn't. Or perhaps we love our dog and our children and compromise despite not having to because we love them. Those are the four circumstances that tend to affect what type of a compromise that will take place with the other person that we're disagreeing with. Something entirely else to keep in mind of is that a common way people get fooled and swindled in compromises is that the other person pretends to prefer something else. They get you to meet in the middle when that's where they wanted to be originally. Let's say that you prefer 20 degrees and I say that I prefer 30 degrees, and we meet in the middle at 25, when in actuality it was 25 degrees that I wanted all along. That's where the saying, the person that offers to meet you in the middle is usually a poor judge of distance, comes from. In essence, life is relationships, and relationships inevitably involve compromises. Therefore, life is compromises. Some of us compromise more than others, but one thing is clear. Unless we plan on living alone in the woods, we cannot live as human beings without making compromises every single day. The main takeaway from this video is that a compromise is not a goal in itself, but a tool to reach the least bad alternative available. And before I leave you, I'll end it with a quote by Aristotle. Man is by nature a social animal. An individual who is unsocial naturally and not accidentally is either beneath our notice, that is, not worthy of our attention, or more than a human.